and we're live on the Venture to Victory podcast. And I am pumped today. We've got John Sheputis in the house. And, every day we're hearing about, artificial intelligence, AI, LLMs, chips, NVIDIA, compute power. And the magic word that always comes up is data center, that infrastructure that's going to power this new revolution. So I wanted to bring someone onto the show who's been involved in both producing, building, financing these things for decades, who's sold several of them for close to $1 billion or more, and is still an active and a major player in a big way in the game today. And John is the man. So, hey, John, how you doing today?
Tim, I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to tee this up a little bit for our audience. A little quick background. So John grew up in St. Louis, near a town called Chesterfield, where I'm from, near my own neighborhood. And John and I have actually been friends going all the way back to high school. It's so fun to see what those high school dreams were like in the evolution, decades later, to see what you've accomplished. John got his electrical engineering degree, which was back in the day was the computer science degree, as we talked about before, from the University of Texas. And he's got his MBA from the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University. Now, during John's illustrious career, he's co-founded a number of companies serving large-scale information technology users, and he has had 5 successful exits. And I think a 6th will be on the way, unless it all goes to hell in the United States, but we're going to see. But for the last 20 years, John's been an innovator in data center design, financing, and production. He built his first data center, Fortune Data Centers, in 2006, added a second one a number of years later, and then that company was merged with Dallas Infomart to create Infomart Data Centers. After running that for several years, John joined GI Partners, a large private equity firm specializing in real estate and infrastructure development. And then in May of last year, John founded Primary Data Infrastructure, which is a company where they help finance and oversee the production of something that's absolutely unbelievable, which was building the largest data center in the world, over 1 million square feet. And they did this in less than a year. And that's part of the Stargate project that you probably heard on television with Donald Trump or the news and the media. We're going to hit that a little bit as well. So like I said, John is the man. We're so excited to have him here today, and we're going to jump right into it. And I'm going to learn a couple of things as well. So John, let's start off with, people always talking about a data center. And obviously, if you're in the space or if you're in technology, you understand generally what a data center is. But a lot of people, they hear the word, they don't really know what a data center is, right? You figure it's this big building somewhere that's got all these chips running, and it's powering electricity for all these tech companies, and particularly in the AI world. I'd like to know from you kind of what's your view of what is a data center in layman's terms in 2025? What's changed, and where is the world going with data centers and infrastructure in this AI revolution that we hear about every day?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind introduction. I hope I live up to expectations here. A data center it's a building, right? Back in the day when the internet was young, these buildings, they were still big, but they've gotten a lot bigger, right? And to your point, it's a building with a special purpose, right? The occupants of the building yes, there's people in the building, but realistically, the building is meant to house computers, which consume a lot of power. They produce heat. That heat has to come out because all those chips are running hard. There's usually a lot of security. Back in the day when the data centers were smaller, the security measures it was almost like camouflage. They were hidden behind a row of hedges. And now they're so big, they have much more advanced security features. They have all these powder-coated fences with cameras and little spikes on top because they're trying to keep people out, right? Or at least keep unwanted people out. And what goes on inside there is important, right? It's not, again, the data center is a building, but the building has a purpose, which is to allow all these computers to store or process data or communicate. And those processes they're perpetual. They go on all the time. They don't take weekends off. So it's a special purpose, high powered, high security, highly reliable building.
Okay, very cool. And I remember most people, again, if you're not in the space, have probably never even seen a data center. They may not recognize what is or been in one. I went to my first data center and it was yours. And you gave me the personal tour 20 years ago almost. And at the time, I thought it was this monstrosity. I couldn't believe it. I was so impressed. Kid from the neighborhood raises, tens of millions of dollars and builds this incredible thing. And as we're going to talk about a little bit later, that monstrosity was really just, a kindergartner in stature compared to what's evolved over the last 20 years and the exciting project that you're working on today. So that's pretty amazing. So let's jump into Stargate, right? People hear about Stargate all the time. Trump's talking about it. Then you hear about investors from all over the world, domestic people, SoftBank, Saudi Arabia. Everybody's dying to invest $500 billion to $1 trillion in this great project. Is that like the movie Stargate from the back days where aliens are going to be piping things down? Or for the average person, like, what is this? It's got a cool name, but what is it? And what does it mean to the AI space? But more importantly, what does it mean to the United States?
Okay, so you asked a whole bunch of questions, and some were serious and some were not.
Of course.
So first of all, we'd been working on this for the better part of a year before we found out it was Stargate. That's how secret it was. No one even told us.
Yeah.
And as soon as we are under a bunch of NDAs, but I guess those don't apply to Trump and some other senior people. So broadly speaking, why is this important to the United States is probably a good place to start. The United States has 4 to 5% of the world's population and about 50% of the world's data center capacity. And that's not an accident. The United States has better intellectual property laws. It has deregulated communications. It has widespread infrastructure. It's a big market. So there's a lot of natural advantages as to why people want to store their data here, or they're allowed to do their computing or their applications, right? And so there's natural tailwinds as to why the United States is a leader in this, and it's due to our laws and due to our policy and due to our infrastructure. So what is Stargate? Stargate, to me, and I always laugh about this in Silicon Valley because people said this is the biggest one ever. And I always laugh to myself because I say until tomorrow, because someone's going to build a bigger one, right? Stargate is an enormous, I didn't come up with the program, but my understanding of it is it's an enormous effort to create, to advance or to further AI in the United States. It's seen as a national interest, and I'm not saying it's a nationalized investment. There's private investors and a whole bunch of names that who are involved in it. The funny thing about the data center business is lots and lots of applications run in these, but of these buildings that are being leased for data centers, there's really only a handful of companies that do most of the absorption, and they're largely the big tech firms and well. It's Oracle, it's Google, it's Meta, it's Amazon, it's Microsoft, and a couple of private companies too. But these enormous platforms are going to house all these applications, and Stargate to me is just the latest rendition of trying to advance that as it seems a national interest. So
these large tech companies, we won't name all the names, but you could take a guess and roll a coin, right? I imagine, I know they have their private data centers, but Stargate is an outsourced platform essentially, right? Whatever they can't produce in their own data centers, they're then leasing space in the Stargate project. How is that working in terms, and also how is that funded? Is it funded by the government? Is it funded by corporations? Yeah. Okay.
No, it's like I said, it's an initiative that's got some government support, but all this is it's private investment. Again, my knowledge of Stargate is limited. Like I said, we were working on it, didn't even know it. The way these big firms, and we can say their names because they're public, it's Google, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon. They, in many cases, sometimes they'll buy land and build their own data centers, but in many cases they will also lease, right? And it's just because their needs are so great, right? They're always, to build a data center, And if you're going very fast and make decisions quick and you don't have any constraints on labor, material, or equipment, it still takes, from like if you had a whole bunch of people ready and trailers full of equipment and said go, it still take a year because there's just so many moving parts, right? And the amount of equipment, it's not just the building. If you build a data center, the land and the shell of the building might be 20% of your cost, but 75 or 80% of your cost is all this very specialized, high-powered technical equipment, which has to be designed and approved and fabricated, brought to site, and then assembled, turned on, terminated, tested. These are big, complicated systems, right? It's not just a big empty shell. There's a lot of moving parts, and it's powerful. That to me is the big thing, is just the scale. I mean, this data center in Texas is 200 megawatts. That's a small city.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's impressive.
All right. So when you're building this type of infrastructure, do you have like pre-lease arrangements in order to build it, or is it build it and they will come? Does Microsoft come to you and they say, hey, John, we need this excess amount of capacity. Go out and build it for us and we'll take X percentage. How does that work? And then you sublease the balance. Typically,
that's a great question. Like? So over the cycles of business, when the data centers were smaller, you would see operators build them what they called on spec, right? Which is they're speculating that they'll find a tenant, and you had to guess like sort of what the technical specifications had to be, and how redundant is the power, how dense is it, like just to kind of give you a sense. One cabinet, which is, call it the size of a small, or actually not that small, for sort of a tall but thinner refrigerator, filled full of servers, will use over 100 kilowatts of power. To give you a sense, that's about as much as a small neighborhood. The average American house is more like 5.
That's incredible.
And maybe if you have a huge house, it might be 10, but you're talking about that much power in 30 to 40 square feet.
Wow. Incredible.
And so the energy density in these places is 1,000 watts a foot. If you go to a warehouse, the energy density, for lights and heating and just basic services might be 5 watts.
Yeah.
So just to kind of give you a sense of how much is being crammed into these areas. And so there's a tremendous amount of systems to generate that amount of power, condition it, to make it reliable, to get it down to the chip, and then to extract the heat. Yeah. We used to use on air cool to sort of blow a lot of air through the servers, right? They had these little fans that made all these noises that were hard to hear in there. Now they use liquid to the chip, right? Because they literally can't get enough airflow. Yeah. And anyway, so my point is there's a lot of systems inside here. And there's a lot of engineering. And to your question, you asked, are these built, or if you build it, it will come? I don't think that's what's going on. I think the vast majority of what's going on now is the big end users need so much. They are going out to the world of developers, right? Who are all highly skilled people. And saying, I need this. Can you help me produce it? And they will share their specs. And so these have turned into what I would call pre-leased or build-to-suit type opportunities, right? In other words, by the time you've bought the land and secured the power and entitlements, chances are you could get a lease, and then you're building something specifically for one of these big ends.
So imagine at the rate things are developing today, you plan this out, you have the amount of power usage you're going to require for a big client. By the time the data center is built a year later, they say, hey, we need 50% more. Is that, do you build based on projected growth from the clients, or is it just, hey, that's just the way it goes? It's unpredictable.
I think the loneliest job would probably be to be one of these end users where your job was trying to predict how much power am I going to need in the future.
Yeah.
And here's my guess, that the way this business has gone through periods of growth. And, and occasionally there's I don't want to say a bust, but a pullback. Like all the data centers that got built for the .com boom, some of those went underutilized for a few years, but eventually they all got reabsorbed, right? Yeah. And during the great financial crisis, the housing crisis, there was no slowdown. These things kept getting absorbed and absorbed and absorbed. Most forms of real estate, like housing or office or industrial, those are functions of how many people live in a given area. You say, here's the population growth in this metropolitan area. They're going to need so many warehouses and so many, whatever, hospitals or schools. you could do or apartments. You could build those on spec. These are so engineered. One, they're hard to build on spec, and two, you don't need to. And last, they're just so darn big, right?
Yeah.
This data center that we're building or helping part of the project, there's lots of highly qualified people who are the contractors and developers. We're going to spend, close to $3 billion, right? That's, and the data center that you thought was big, all those years ago, that was this puny little $50 million data center.
So how many football fields long is something like this?
It's pretty big.
Yeah.
But again, it's not like it's this big it's filled full of expensive equipment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's, like I said, this one is $3 billion, about 1 million square feet.
That's incredible. So the first thing that comes to my mind is these big companies are spending the most money, obviously, and they're growing and growing and growing. And so what happens to the small guy? Does a small guy get squeezed out altogether from 7 companies that have massive growth needs? And those companies have the pockets and the cash flow and the cash reserves to basically pay whatever they need, right? At some point in time. How does that work? Is there a variable pricing structure, like a commodity? Do the small guys just fall to the wayside and it's like, hey, go join Microsoft, or Oracle or Facebook?
It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
We joke about it a little bit inside because there's really, like I said, half a dozen or 7 companies that absorb 95 or 99% of the new inventory. And so that leaves this, unloved mass of the Fortune 493 that are all great companies, but they're just not absorbing at that scale. And so they have choices, right? They can either, and there's other data centers, we call them multi-tenant data centers, where you might only be leasing half a megawatt, not 500 megawatts. And somebody who owns one of these big facilities will subdivide it. And they call that co-location. But to your point, those prices, when there's this much demand in a market, there's only so much supply and demand goes up, price goes up.
Yeah. Interesting.
But there are specialist firms that deal with small footprints that are network dense, bigger footprints. And then of course, these campuses that are being built that everybody's talking about.
It's so amazing. When I visited that first data center, you had told me you had spent about $50 million. And I was impressed, young guy raises $50 million. I'm like, today there's a lot of A rounds that are, it's ridiculous. Like they could be 50, 100, hundreds of millions of dollars. But 20 years ago, like $50 million was a lot of money to go out and pitch that. And it's just hard to believe that you did 50 then and you had a bunch of challenges and now it's 3.5 billion. It's just, it blows me away. Yeah.
It like I said, like if you were in any other class of real estate, like the sort of physical infrastructure, you would not have seen this level of growth because all those other things depend on number of people. This is really based upon the amount of computing power, and that number just keeps going up and up. I think, you asked a question a moment ago, what happens when you run out? Mm-hmm. And so what you'll see now from the very big end users is they're going to commit to, I want you to build these 4 buildings for me and their said capacity, but I want room to put 10 more.
Yeah.
And so the short answer to your question is, when do they need more? We build more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing that also keeps going up is what I call the density, right? Like when that data center you saw at the time was considered efficient and high dense or high density. And those cabinets full of servers might have used 6 kW. The one we're doing down in Texas is, 20 times the same physical dimensions of the cabinet. Maybe it's a little taller, 20 times as much energy.
Absolutely unbelievable. And if we go out 5 years from now, this could end up seeing small. It's just incredible.
I'll be honest with you. I don't know. At some point we run up against the laws of physics. I think, you just get more and more, right?
I know so much is being built for this wave of AI that's coming. It's already here, but coming. What is your perspective on crypto, Bitcoin? Because there's been a lot of talk over the past couple of years about their energy consumption needs as well. Are they a small player in the grand scheme of things as you see it, or is that part of the calculation looking out over the next 10 years?
For what we do, which is sort of for these big credit end users, that's not really what we do. I will say this about, and first of all, I'm not an owner of Bitcoin, and don't call me if you want advice on it. I will say this: they picked a lot of good sites. What you're seeing right now is, for the prior, call it 20, 25 years, the data centers were congregating around network, right? Like, you and I look at our phone and we think data moves around and data is mobile. But when data gets big, it's not very mobile. It's kind of like moving around like blocks made of concrete. They're kind of hard to move. And the other thing that's really hard to move is the physical network, right? And when networks get centralized, usually the center of a network, sort of like the center of a spider web, it's difficult to move it.
Yeah.
And data centers were congregating around major, highly networked cities like Silicon Valley or Dallas or Chicago or Northern Virginia, which is a big chunk of the nation's cloud compute infrastructure. What we're seeing now is the applications need so much power there that the data centers are moving away from the center of the network, not because they want to, because they have to. And they're moving towards power, kind of like a farmer who needs more water because they have to plant more crops. They're going to go upstream to get to the water. The data centers are moving to the power. And so what you're seeing is data centers moving to these power-rich areas where the variable cost of, first of all, they're usually energy-producing areas, like the one that we're talking about in West Texas. And they're not out there because the hotels are awesome, although there are some nice hotels in Abilene, Texas. They're there because it's an energy producing region.
Yeah.
And that's what Bitcoin did first. Bitcoin is a very price sensitive product. If the price of energy goes up, they stop producing Bitcoin. That calculus does not apply to people who are doing AI, because what they're doing is so valuable. They want to run all out all the time. And so what we're seeing is the sites that were identified by Bitcoin are being absorbed by AI. And I think the Bitcoin guys have to find new sites.
Yeah.
I mean, do I see it as part of the calculus? I'm not an expert in it, but yes. And here's why. There's been a lot of concern that these data centers use so much power that it's going to destabilize the grids, and like a hospital or airport won't have power because someone's powering a data center. And first of all, that's malarkey. It's not true. The data center usually has backup power of its own, and if there was a thunderstorm or a deep freeze and outage, the data center would power itself. But the Bitcoin guys generally, if the price of power goes up or power is not available, they just stop producing. And I think they're part of the, what we're going to see happen, and I'm sorry for the long answer, is the data center used to sort of sit aside as just a liability to the electric grid.
Yeah.
And now, between the needs are so great, and the Bitcoin guys are part of this, that they have to be seen as working in partnership with the grid. Like when the grid has congestion or it's a hot day when you get a spare the air day, there has to be a signal to these people to say, throttle down your production so we can keep the houses on and air conditioning running for consumers who don't have backup generators.
Yeah.
And I think all the operators, Bitcoin and cloud, have to be part of that.
Yeah. So it's a great way to fill in the gaps as well.
Exactly.
I would
exactly.
think.
Right. But I will say this is the Bitcoin guys were the first ones to move to the energy rich areas, and now AI is following them.
So, from a U.S. strategic defense perspective, I always think you're building these massive facilities, which, you don't even need a satellite to see them. They're just there. And I'm not talking about an all-out, engagement where someone's sending a missile over, although, from a security perspective, you do think of that. More along the lines of what type of protection is put in place from foreign entities trying to essentially hack these centers, because if you cut off the fuel supply, which is the data centers, the output of everything else kind of grinds to a halt. What is that like in 2025?
Well, let's just take a step back. I mean, these facilities have physical measures, right? Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't have said, but after Mr. President Trump said, here's what the project is, suddenly the security level on this construction site went up. There's razor wire fencing all around it, more lights and more badging, and not that it was insecure before, but it went up. So there's physical security all around these. There's redundancy in all the services. Like there's water tanks in case there's no water. There's fuel stored when there's no fuel. It's like if there was an earthquake in California, you should go to a data center.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it'll have power. It'll still be running. Now, they may not let you in.
Do we still have access to that one that I visited, like a secret backdoor entrance?
They were pretty good about taking my badge.
Well, we'll just have to go to the Burlingame underground bunker then.
That's right. To your question around, what's the national security? The internet was originally a defense project. It came out of a group called DARPA, which is a defense research group. And what it is it's a decentralized network. Because back in the time, they were worried that if someone really wanted to shut down the United States, they'd knock out the AT&T central office in a few major cities, and the United States would be dark. Yeah. And so the internet is this where if some modes of communication are cut, the traffic reroutes, right? And so
right.
The redundancy is the cloud, not any one facility. And I think that's the reason why Stargate has 10 sites, because no one will be the only one, right? Yeah. In a way, the redundancy will be a handful of sites, each one of which shares the load. And there's a failover plan where if some processing was done here and there was a big storm on the East Coast, the processing would roll to other centers, right? It's just national interest. It's weather. It's other things too.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, certainly, because you're kind of always you wonder that, like, if you condense so much power to so many large facilities, it seems like the risk profile goes up as well. And they never talk about that on the news. So,
what's funny is you and I are both old enough to remember this is before probably the internet boom, like the .com boom,
right?
Where every time you did something online and there was a problem, you saw like a construction sawhorse saying, "We've got maintenance." And whenever I see that now, what's your first reaction?
They were hacked or they're down or
what's wrong with these people?
Right.
And so this idea that everything's always on is sort of embedded. And even at these levels of compute and storage and power, there will be redundancy. Like when Amazon or Google or Microsoft sets up a cloud service region in a metropolitan area, there's usually 2 or 3 key sites. And then there's other satellite sites around that, such that if any one goes down or there's an issue, the other ones will pick up the load. And the redundancy is in the architecture. Not just the facilities themselves are redundant, but it's the cloud.
That's great to know. From an average person who's always wondering about national defense and protection. That's good to know as well.
This is I think the internet may be the greatest. All these other beautiful, like the space program and all that, the internet may be the greatest thing to ever come out of defense research.
Yeah, because of that decentralization and ability to kind of move those nodes around if needed.
And Tim, just to make this clear, the use case they were solving for was the one you were just coming up with, which is the Russians bomb communication centers.
Yeah.
So this has been thought about for 50 years.
Okay, terrific. Hey, going back to that first data center for a minute, because a lot of people that will watch this podcast are early stage guys, startup folks themselves, and they always have those moments of potential crisis, an existential moment. It seems like every entrepreneur that was successful had, if not several, at least one existential crisis. I know you're in advisory, funding, kind of overseeing on these projects. The first one you actually were all in and built it. Was there a big existential crisis early on? I'd love to hear about that. Just so people could feel comfortable with, these things happen, and here's how John and his team overcame it. Or these the great war stories that give you those scars. You laugh today about it, but back then it was not so funny.
I wasn't laughing then. So I had I started off as an engineer, did some consulting, and then wound up working for some tech firms. I moved out to California in '98 to be part of the internet boom, right? And then I was probably around the age of, call it 40, or second child was born. I didn't want to I could see the data center had a bigger, this is a few years removed from the .com bust. And so the data center business was not obvious. I said, this is more than network. It's about power. And so I bought a building, or I was trying to buy a building in San Jose that was a retired fab, because we weren't making chips in these buildings anymore. But they had a lot of power. They had a lot of infrastructure. And I thought, let's convert that to a data center. And so we're sort of at the tail end of the expansion that was fueling the housing bubble, call it 2006 or 7. And so loans were easy to get, money was flowing, and I thought I could take on this project by myself. And I got a few partners, and I had put down, I had a good career already, and so I put down, at the time was a lot of money to me, as some deposits, not thinking I could lose them. And then the financial crisis hits. All the construction lending, just all the offers are withdrawn. An investor backs out. And suddenly I'm wondering, how do I explain this to my wife that I just blew 20% of our retirement savings? And do I need to grow vegetables in my backyard to survive? and amazingly, what happened, first of all, we stuck with it. We had a very good plan. We had a distinctive plan and a good team, and we built a great product. And we leased it up. Part of it was to NTT, which is a big communications firm, but most of it was to a young company, which at that time was still called The Facebook.
Facebook.
And even they were not obvious at the time. Like that, when I took that, like when you raise money from a fund, you have to get their approval to do things, right? Because they sort of own, they get to approve a lot of decisions. And I was trying to explain to a bunch of older people who had never heard of Facebook, but they had heard of MySpace.
Yeah.
And Tim, you're going to laugh here. They kept confusing Facebook with MySpace. And they kept saying, well, I don't know about this social media stuff. And they didn't like some of the contract terms. I said, John, you go tell Spacebook that I want these terms changed. I'm like, well, their name is Facebook. And anyway, it was just the weirdest. And in retrospect, that's now $1 trillion company.
Yeah.
And it was the best bet we ever made.
Yeah.
But just what you don't realize is, success looks always obvious in the rearview mirror, but at the time it didn't.
Yeah.
Right. So
I remember those days. MySpace was huge for musicians. If you remember,
right.
I think a lot of us were just that's how we were social networking with, in the music ecosystem, not looking what was happening with, young kids in college with the Facebook, Right. Reminds me of Batman was originally the Batman, and they dropped the on it. So, yeah, well, you backed the right horse. That's what really matters.
Well,
could have gone either way.
We had a good plan, and we got funded, and we built the project. And there's always issues you fight through, right? I mean, when you build things for real, construction projects, there's delays. Something's missing, something's broke, somebody didn't perform, and you just have to find a way to make it happen and make sure everybody gets to win.
Is a great point they just made, that success seems so obvious looking through the rearview mirror. Not always the case from the present moment.
Right.
Even more so in today's present moment, right? Because the pace at which things are evolving and changing is so quick that it's really hard to look out in the future and anticipate anything. If somebody told you in 1985 that everybody would carry around these Star Trek-like boxes, they communicate with everybody in the world, they'd listen to music, you'd watch television shows, a whole business, ecosystem would be built on the backbone of these phones, which ties to the internet. You just wouldn't believe any of it. So it's hard to think today what the world will be like 20 years from now, looking at how dramatic it was, going from 20 years back in 1985 to 205. It's just hard to imagine. And so with that great piece of, thought that you just shared with us, would there be some advice in particular, the old wisdom sage advice, looking back at the window in the rearview mirror for young entrepreneurs who are coming up and maybe struggling, going through those existential moments? Any piece of wisdom that you could share with them about sticking it out?
There's probably some good Steve Jobs videos on this, but so I'm for the Northwestern's Kellogg School. We go to lunch with a lot of the folks who come out for summer internships, and it always amazes me because in the early '90s, this before the internet was widespread, we didn't know what email was then, right? And no one had a mobile phone yet. So, so back then, there was like just a handful of kids, young adults who came out here for summer interns, like for Intel. There's still one or two might go to Intel, but like now there's a dozen at Facebook and a dozen at Google and a dozen at Microsoft or Amazon. And I get asked a lot of questions. And the two questions I always get asked, Tim, and you and I are both from St. Louis out here, right? So one is it worth it to live out here, right? And the second is, when will I know to start my own business? And they're kind of the same answer. You're by being out here, and like if you're part of tech or biotech, you're worth all these young companies where there's capital formation of new ideas, and you can sort of see the changing landscape in a business as to who's solving what problem. And to me, an entrepreneur is somebody who sees an opportunity in business, a problem that's not being solved, and it's very valuable to solve, and they think they can do a better job. And that's where the spark has to start. Yeah. You can't be, I'm not saying you shouldn't have an exit plan or, a director of finance or all the other things that are necessary. Those are all necessary. But it all starts with, there's some experience or customer issue or unmet demand that you think you understand better than everybody else. And once you do that, to me, that's like a very good form of true north, because that when you don't know what you're doing, you just fall back on that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And to me, it's motivating, it's organizing, and it helps you prioritize.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page with that. A number of years ago, I also went to Kellogg, as you know, and I did a presentation to about 40, young tech guys who were actually at the University of Illinois. That was the connection who wanted to be entrepreneurs, not just engineers. And I remember the same kind of question asked: does it matter whether it was 20 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago? California was always outrageously expensive, and and it even seemed much further away back then, right? The idea of getting on a plane and being there in 3 hours, you might as well have thought you were going in a covered wagon. It was going to take you a year. Like people it was a psychological barrier. And I used to just say, hey, you're on an airplane and 3 hours later, you're there basically with the time change. But I always get the same advice, which was always, and I do this in recruiting a lot too, because that's, bringing leaders in and having them relocate. I always say, go to where the action is. It doesn't matter. If you go to where the action is, you're going to get caught up in people around you that are bringing tremendous energy, enthusiasm, and optimism. It's always going to be that way. And the wonderful thing about coming out to the Silicon Valley is in this 60-mile radius, you have an actual chance to meet with people, build personal relationships. I think we lost a little bit of that through the pandemic, but certainly here, it's the greatest place to be, to actually meet people, build those relationships. And that's going to be the inspiration, I think, that's going to, push you through in future years. So I think we're on the total same page as well.
And I think first of all, I'm glad you said all that. You're 100% right. It's those connections to these, like you're going to see the hole in the marketplace sooner by being right in the middle of it. And so my dad gave me some good career advice earlier on. And my dad was an engineer, and I went into engineering, but his advice was, whatever you do, you should make it or sell it, because everybody else keeps score. And if I was to change that for today, I would say, his was manufacturing world. What I would say is sell it or do it.
Yeah.
And and the emphasis is on selling it. If you're raising money, you're gonna have to pitch. And no is a perfect. Getting a fast no, it's the second best answer, right? Because whenever you hear no, just say why, right? If I had a chance to do this again, what could I have done differently or better? And that's how you get better, and you get more reps and more at bats out here,
right?
And I think Silicon. I mean, yes, there's a lot of the big data centers aren't being built in California because California is an energy consuming area, not an energy producing area. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I still think California has its issues. California does a lot of things right. They protect the individual, they protect innovation, and that a lot of that's going to stay here.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I've been here for 40 years. I don't really plan on leaving for all the ups and downs of California. It's the greatest place. So for those that are in Miami and Austin, been there, love those places too. but every time I come back and feel that weather and see the mountains and see the excitement of all the young people, it's very inspirational and inspires older dogs to learn new tricks, as we say. So I'm pretty excited about that. Hey, John,
And
this has been. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just add this. I think having Silicon Valley having competition from Austin or New York or Miami or Seattle, that's all good. I think multiple hubs is better for the United States.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, this has been absolutely amazing, John. I like to always end this. This is the Venture to Victory podcast, where we're talking about obviously venture capital funding to exit, but also that idea of venture taking a chance, taking a risk, and being victorious. So I like to end this with, what does it mean to you to be victorious in family, business, or life?
I think it gives you a sense of freedom and a sense of worrying less, right? Like I got advice from a young when I was younger. We brought in a new CEO and I was the COO, and we didn't get along, and he showed me the org chart. And so I went to some of the board members didn't like the decision, but that didn't change it. So I went to him and I said, what should I do? I'm, whatever, my late 30s, I have a kid. And he said to me, I'm not going to say his name, but super respected guy at a big firm, investment firm. And he said, John, first thing you got to do is get the house your kids are going to grow up in and make it debt free. Then you can work on getting your don't worry money, and then you can work on getting your FU money. I'm going to leave that last one off the table. I think success means you have more opportunity, more freedom, and less worry. And you should be two things. One, you should be more gracious and be more generous. Mm-hmm. And you should show that with gratitude forward. That's what I think the best people do. They make everybody else around them better through doing those things.
I think that's such great advice. I know that so many successful entrepreneurs look back in some cases and they say, hey, the amount of time I spent was also taken away from other priorities in my life, like my kids, my health, things of that nature. And I feel like there's a shift happening right now where people are cognizant of that fact, that it's not just about burning the candle constantly, although in a startup, you kind of have to do that. We all went through periods where we had to pay our dues, right? Those first 10, 15 years, you're working the 80 hours, the 100 hours. That's part of the game. But as you get older, the common theme really is people have shifted, and I don't want to call it work-life balance, just that idea that if you wake up one day and you are very successful and have lots of resources, but you missed out on the opportunities and the time you can never gain back, was it really worth it? So I think people are relooking what success, what victory really is, and they're trying to balance it in a more thoughtful way. And that's a consistent theme.
I would agree with that. But I think, there's like sort of the internal reflection of victory, and then there's the external, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, you should be the most gracious, best teammate, most supportive, offering all your experience and wisdom where you can, and building people up. Yeah.
And fatherhood also,
it's a good teacher for those who haven't done it.
It's a good instructor for these lessons. So that's the other theme is when people look back, they're not just reflecting on what they were like as a leader in a company, but they're also integrating that, was I the good husband? Was I a good dad? And I think that's the wisdom that you acquire from those scars on your back over time.
You should always make time for that. My dad's not doing well. He's 87 now. And I was asking him some of those, the questions you'd ask your dad. And I said, what are you most proud of? Here I am, I've had a good career and father and all that. He said he was proud of me that I coached all those little league baseball teams. Probably coached like 20 or 30. And he goes, I hope you do more of that. And I was like, wow. Really? That's what was number one on your list? And I just, because he said it's a great way to give back.
Yeah. That's
so. Coach, I'm not saying little league's the best sport, but pick something to get involved in and be a part of it.
Well, I think it also shows you the wisdom, that comment that it's not the grandiose things you do that define you, that create memories of your character. A lot of times it's just a series of small little events cumulatively. And so you don't need to do huge things. You just have to be there at the right time for these small moments. So, John, this is really awesome. I learned so much about data centers, so I can explain this to my children, and they ask me all about it. And they ask me what Stargate is. Is that going to the moon or Mars, or No, no, no. That's just a huge infrastructure project. And watch my pod with John. You'll find out. For anyone that would like to reach out to you as a potential partner on the funding, whatever the issue is, what's the best way to find you these days? Is it through LinkedIn? Is it through another source?
I think LinkedIn is great. I have a last name that's somewhat unique, so I'm easy to find.
Yeah.
And you can, if anyone, I'll try to respond as fast as I can.
And for those that, if you can't find him on LinkedIn and you come out to San Francisco at a party or something, you won't miss him. He's a very tall man. So you stick out above the crowd that way. Well, John, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for being here. And that's a wrap.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Cheers.
The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.